this is Eisenhower's boyhood home. So it is all original furnishings, and the home is on its original site. I'm a little early, but
it is on its original site.
Its original site?
Original site.
So was this a farm at the time? Or
no, there was a street out here, about 4 or 5 homes, a street to the west. This was part of the neighborhood.
Okay.
It's just
so
pretty much to this side, there wasn't anything much meadow and things. They had 2 acres. They had a big garden, a milk house, and chickens, a little barn. Nothing much, but most people kind of did in those days.
So this
definitely had chickens.
This is the last home of the neighborhood that was here then?
Right, right.
Okay.
They took the rest out when they decided to build everything here. So really lucky to be able to do that in some parts. Wouldn't have. That's his mother, Ida. 1946 is when she died. And 1947 the home opened. So we were lucky to have it all, because he was already a 5-star general by the time she died. That was the front parlor, and it was just for company and gas. The family Bible's in there. 7 boys were born to David and Ida. So 6 grew to manhood in this home. Grandpa living with them made 9 Eisenhowers.
Furniture original or?
All original.
It's all
original. Quilts on the bed are made by his mother, Ida. Her sewing machine is there. The 6 boys slept upstairs in 3 rooms. 1 6 by 7 foot. Their dad worked up at a creamery here in Abilene as a maintenance man. 80 hours a week, and he made $10. So we are actually seeing the home as it looked when she died. And when they were small growing up, of course, they wouldn't have had the electricity or plumbing. That came later. That took baths and wash tubs and had an outhouse.
And we read she was a stover, her maiden name. Is
yes.
she part of the whole candy thing? No, she's not.
Not at all.
Oh, I bet you get asked that all the time.
God, I get asked that all the time. Only until they build it here.
Did he
get asked for
Did Ike's dad proceed?
She died at all. Now, this is how it looked in the 40s. So by then, her boys were all successful. And what we see are beautiful antiques. What they had was just, $1 or $2 furniture back in those days. But well made. Well made. Kitchen and dining room, bathroom didn't come in until he was 18. So there to your right was originally a bedroom for Grandpa. Kitchen's reflected in the mirrored doorway, so there you can see that coal gas stove. Originally a wood stove sat here, and the room we're in was kitchen, dining room, bathroom, study hall. All our food, all our pans, everything would have been right here in this room. And 9 of them around a big table with benches.
Did all the brothers go into the military?
None of them did. None of them did. By then, he went as, going to West Point, so he was younger. The others did banker. Arthur was a banker, Edgar a lawyer, Earl an engineer, Roy a pharmacist.
So they were all intelligent, well educated.
Very educated. Yeah. They did it all on their own, went to school, paid for it themselves. This was a dough box, and his mother Ida made hope. They lived to see him a general, but not president. So when he left here, he went to West Point to come back a lot to visit his parents' home, but not to live here again, as he was in the Army.
That's where he did his total undergrad
Everything,
degree.
yes. You get a degree when you come out. You're in the Army. You have to give, I think, probably at least 4 years, and then you sign up and etc. He married May.
Was he not a lieutenant in World War I?
He wasn't very high in World War I.
I thought
just stayed. It was. He didn't go overseas. He was over here all the time. So, well, he was getting a little disillusioned with things, but then when 2 hit, he really climbed the ladder in a hurry. After maybe, they married, they moved over 35 times, never owned a home until after the White House. And they had a farm in Gettysburg.
That's where it was.
Gettysburg.
I didn't get a chance to go.
That was a childlike family, which actually, the older I get, the more it's confirmed to me that I was unheard. He was happy if he knew somebody else happy.
Little Rock, Arkansas, September 4th, 1957. Despite the Supreme Court ruling that ended segregation, Brown versus Board of Education, Governor Orville Fobbs deploys 270 National Guardsmen to prevent African American students from entering Little Rock Central High School. While local Urban League and NAACP chapters favor pushing ahead with Phase 1 of the school integration plan, white citizen councils in and around Little Rock stir up mob resistance. As tensions build, events at Little Rock Central High School directly challenge the authority of the federal government. President Eisenhower is constitutionally required to enforce the law of the land. But what action should he take? Now, you are on the scene. In a moment, you will vote on what President Eisenhower's policy decisions should be in Little Rock. Here are the facts. Up until now, the President's support for civil rights legislation has been low-key. He has not offered public support for the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, ending segregation. He feels that quick, forced migration can only lead to conflict. The President also knows that many Americans look upon African American civil rights activists and white extremists with the same wording. But Ike will not be cowed by anyone who threatens the rights of his fellow Americans. When young Emmett Till from Chicago was murdered in Mississippi in August of 1955, President Eisenhower orders a reluctant FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to set up a branch office in Mississippi to pursue the case. 2 years later, Ike sponsors and signs the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Yet while it opens the door a little wider for racial equality, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 has little effect on continuing opposition to school integration. On September 23, 1957, in continued violation of court-ordered school integration, Governor Fobbs again orders the Arkansas National Guard to keep African American students from entering Little Rock Central High School. The President must make a policy decision, and soon.
Making too much of a fuss, more than you care for anyway. Just turn around and he said,
January 1954. The Korean War has been over for only 6 months, but the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union continues to keep the world on edge. With the death of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin in March 1953, a four-way internal power struggle in Moscow leaves the White House wondering, whom can we trust? Britain's Winston Churchill, the man who once warned of the Soviet Iron Curtain descending on Europe, now predicts a change for the better in Kremlin leadership. But Russia's arm might continues to grow, and to complicate matters, the Soviets have now added the hydrogen bomb to their arsenal. Meanwhile, France asked for United States support in Indochina to defeat Viet Minh communist rebels surrounding the French outpost of Dien Bien Phu. Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the Viet Minh and the former premier of all Indochina, is supported by the Chinese communists in the north. Should President Eisenhower risk another Korea by sending troops to oppose Ho Chi Minh in Southeast Asia? Should he ask America's allies to commit a united military effort to the region, aimed not at stabilizing French colonial rule, but at defeating communist aggressors and ensuring a free Indochina? And what changes, if any, should be made in our foreign policy towards the Soviets? Should the policy of containment, first proposed in 1946 by President Truman's Deputy Chief of Mission to Moscow, George F. Kennan, and supported by Eisenhower, still be applied to the affairs in Europe and other hotspots around the world?
Senator's own team, then letting McCarthy undermine himself. That undermining is not long in coming. In past years, McCarthy's targets have included the president's old friends, General George Marshall and General Walter Bedell Smith. By 1954, these attacks escalate to a full-fledged investigation of loyalty in the United States Army. Yet, this time, McCarthy has met a resounding counteroffensive. Part of that blow is struck by Attorney Joseph Welch, counsel to the United States Army. Deftly turning the tables on McCarthy, Welsh uncovers and makes public evidence of preferential treatment which the senator has obtained for one of his young committee aides, David Shine, who has been drafted but has never had to perform military duties. The second salvo comes from a new medium, television, and a new commitment to news reporting, investigative journalism. In this case, the reporter is Edward R. Murrow, distinguished newsman from CBS.
No one familiar with the history of this country can deny that congressional committees are useful. It is necessary to investigate before legislating. But the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly.
Newsman Ed Murrow and news producer Fred Friendly pour their energies into a blistering expose of the fear-mongering tactics used by Joseph McCarthy and his staff. This counter-evidence hits home with a majority of Americans. The combination of Welsh and Murrow, whom sources say have been encouraged by the White House, as well as McCarthy's own unsubstantiated railings in front of 20 million viewers, seals the senator's fate. By the summer of 1954, McCarthy is censured by the Senate. His campaign of intimidation is finished, and with him, the Red Scare moves off the front page. Kansas, 1951. Not the kind of place one would expect to give birth to the modern struggle for civil rights in America. Here, the parents of 13 African-American school children sue for their right to send their children to neighborhood schools, schools for whites only. When the Topeka case and similar cases from Delaware, South Carolina, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. reach the Supreme Court, they are combined into one case named Oliver L. Brown et al. Versus the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. On May 17, 1954, in a landmark decision, the Supreme Court overturns the doctrine of separate but equal, a law that has upheld the legal separation of whites and blacks in many areas of American life since 1896. This decision opens the door for the integration of public schools throughout the United States. But the reaction from the White House is reserved. Eisenhower knows the minds of Southern segregationists. He knows their entrenched beliefs, their resistance to rapid change, and their fierce loyalty to self-determination. The president has made public his opposition to racial inequalities by achieving full integration of the armed forces, by barring discrimination throughout Washington, D.C., and by ordering equal opportunity in federal employment. As early as his first State of the Union address in February 1953, Eisenhower has made it clear that discrimination is the enemy of freedom. But President Eisenhower also believes firmly that civil rights is an issue which should be worked out locally and gradually. He is especially worried about southern states where the threat of public school closings is very real. As a result, the president opts for a middle-of-the-road policy on civil rights, encouraging local leaders across the nation to bring about school integration in a calm and orderly fashion. But events are already in motion that will challenge Ike's emphasis on gradualism. Montgomery, Alabama, December 1st, 1955. After a long and tiring day at work, Rosa Parks, a department store seamstress and a secretary for the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, is arrested for failing to give up her seat on a Montgomery City bus to a white passenger. In quick reaction, 26-year-old Martin Luther King Jr., minister of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, leads thousands of Montgomery's African-American residents in a mass boycott of the city's buses. The boycott brings ridership down to a fraction of its normal capacity. 381 days later, the city of Montgomery finally lifts its restrictions on seating for all public buses. With the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, the demand for more civil rights reform spreads. In 1957, Ike pushes for a Civil Rights Act geared to strengthening voting rights for all Americans. Contentious debate in Congress weakens the bill, but Ike signs it into law as the Civil Rights Act of 1957. It is the first major piece of federal civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. But no sooner has the act been signed into law than new troubles arise for the White House. September 1957, Little Rock, Arkansas. White citizen councils resist local school board plans for school integration. The problem is compounded by Arkansas Governor Orville Thomas, who uses the National Guard to block 9 African-American students from attending class at Little Rock High. On September 24th, faced with a recalcitrant governor and an open rebellion against a federal mandate, President Eisenhower calls in the 101st Airborne to restore order and enforce integration at Little Rock Central High. That same night, he goes before the American people in a special address from the White House.
The very basis of our individual rights and freedoms rests upon the certainty that the President and the executive branch of government will support and ensure the carrying out of the decisions of the federal courts, even when necessary, with all the means that the President commands.
Many Southern leaders are incensed with Ike's decision, but the President is furious with Governor Thomas, whom he had entrusted to bring orderly integration to public schools in this key Southern state. White House critics and supporters alike realize that it is the preservation of public order and upholding the Constitution, not integration, which drives Eisenhower's actions. In the final years of his administration, President Eisenhower calls on business leaders, clergy, and civil rights activists to solve the problems of integration through understanding, goodwill, and local action. Much of what will take place in the fight for civil rights in the next several years had its beginnings during the Eisenhower administration. Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin has conducted a search for communists in every corner of American life. Still, with each new accusation, the Red Scare grows, and debate over personal liberties continues to divide the country. As President Eisenhower takes office, he looks for ways to combat McCarthy and his communist witch hunt, a witch hunt that is proving to be an embarrassment for the White House. During World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies, but as soon as the war ended, these two powers began to struggle for Cold War supremacy. With that struggle, the threat of internal subversion began to occupy the thoughts of Congress, as well as the American people. In 1945, the House Un-American Activities Committee was formed to probe labor, the federal government, and even the movie industry in search of communists and communist sympathizers. In 1948, professed communist Whittaker Chambers went before the House Un-American Activities Committee and accused former high-ranking State Department official Alger Hiss of espionage during the 1930s. The committee, including a young congressman named Richard Nixon, found Hiss guilty of perjury. The highly charged investigation touched off red hysteria in America. By 1949, the free world is stunned when Russia successfully tests its own atomic bomb, and China falls to the Red Army under the command of Mao Zedong. By 1950, the Alger Hiss case, the Soviet A-bomb tests, the fall of China to Mao's communists, and the outbreak of a hot war in Korea all add more fuel to the fires of doubt and suspicion. Many want to know who's helping the commies. February 9th, 1950, seizing upon an issue calculated to boost his campaign for re-election, Wisconsin Junior Senator Joseph McCarthy gives a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia. He claims to have in his possession lists of card-carrying communists currently working in the State Department. With his Wheeling speech, McCarthy sets the stage for an assault on personal liberties in America. 1952. McCarthy, a Republican, is swept back into office. Eisenhower wins the White House in a landslide. Because Ike has campaigned in part on a get-tough policy with communists around the world, McCarthy's issue of security at home does not fall on deaf ears with the new administration. On February 11, 1953, President Eisenhower refuses to commute the death sentences of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, convicted in 1951 of selling atomic bomb secrets to the Soviets. For many, Ike's stand on the Rosenbergs appears to justify Senator McCarthy's attempts to uncover treason in government. But personally, Ike finds McCarthy's tactics to be reprehensible. Ike tells advisors, "I refuse to get down in the gutter with that man." While the senator's bluster continues to get national attention, he has yet to produce any confessions, indictments, or convictions. Ike suddenly sees an opportunity to counterpunch against the McCarthy committee when he visits the town of Hanover, New Hampshire. The counterpunch comes through his commencement remarks to the class of 1953 at Dartmouth College.
Don't join the book burners. Don't think you're going to conceal faults by concealing evidence that they ever existed. Don't be afraid to go in your library and read every book, as long as any document does not offend our own ideas of decency. That should be the only sentence. How will we defeat communism unless we know what it is?
Yet, even with these strong words, the president refuses to go toe-to-toe with McCarthy over the issue of personal liberties. Ike prefers to use his presidential influence behind the scenes, working to uncover evidence against the senator's own team, then letting McCarthy undermine himself. That undermining is not long in coming.